Let's bring in some reaction now. Chair in Social Security Systems Administration and Management Studies at the Wits School of Governance, Professor Alex van den Heever, joins us to expand on this discussion. A very good evening to you, Prof. Thank you for your time. More than a third of households in ANC strongholds depend on social grants to put bread on the table. How do we begin to quantify this? Is it a safe haven, or does it reflect South Africa's tightrope walk between social welfare in an unequal society?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer in a straightforward manner. In many respects, our high levels of unemployment have resulted in distributional problems, that's income distribution problems. But social grants and these income redistribution schemes are actually critical for maintaining some social coherence in a country large in quite significant social distress. The big increase in grants are due largely to the introduction of a new group into coverage, and those are the people between 18 and 59 for the social relief of distress grant, which is not a very large amount per person, and that resulted in the increase. But that in itself shows the problem that we have with unemployment. So South Africa basically has to deal with the economic growth problem, which is resulting in unemployment. But while it does that, it has to mitigate the impact of that unemployment through some degree of income support. We cannot do without it.
I asked you the question because I think one needs to first understand the role of social grants, right? Because my understanding is that they're in place to improve the standards of living and redistribute wealth to create a more equitable society. Are they serving their role if the numbers keep increasing?
Well, so you say, are they having an effect because the numbers keep increasing? On its own, social grants are not going to be able to mitigate the effects of reduced economic growth. South Africa does have a problem. Its economic growth performance has been really poor for a developing country such as ours. But what it is doing is not really solving the problem, because even the levels of the allocation, the levels of the grants that are provided, the amounts that are given, purely mitigate the extreme effects of inadequate income. Income is necessary for people to be able to access society, to give a degree of agency. Without income, you are effectively socially excluded in a very fundamental way in the societies we have today. But it's not really bringing people out of it. It's really mitigating the worst effects. So we're not really solving many of our fundamental problems. We're not only solving the social exclusion problem, and we're also not solving the employment problem. These are therefore things that have to be looked at very fundamentally, and South Africa has to look very, very carefully at what has obstructed economic growth to date, because that really has to be our major solution down the line.
What's your assessment of the breakdown insofar as provinces are concerned? I mean, because the survey by Stats SA places the Eastern Cape and Limpopo high in the rankings of child-headed households, showing that social grant beneficiaries climbed from about 13% in 2002 to almost 40%.
Yeah, so we have a large number of the provinces outside of Gauteng and the Western Cape do show very poor socioeconomic indicators. They also show very high levels of income inequality, poverty, and unemployment. And despite the fact that large parts of South Africa's population actually moved to Gauteng and the Western Cape, those are the areas with much higher levels of employment, a greater proportion of the population and households with incomes rather than grants, with Western Cape being the best performer overall. So despite the income, the population inflow into those places, they're actually more successful generally. So a lot of these more historically rural provinces remain socioeconomically weak, effectively, with a large parts of their productive population moving away from them. They're not growing in population size. So yeah, we've got a problem in most of our provinces. We've got economic growth in two, But probably the best performance in terms of economic growth is the Western Cape, and that is showing it also has the best levels. It has the most optimal income distribution at this point in time, largely because of higher employment levels. So it's because we've got quite a diverse range of socioeconomic contexts in between the provinces, but we really do have a number of provinces that demonstrate high levels of socioeconomic distress.
Stats SA also noted the big jump in social grants to households was also as a result of the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant. Since then, the percentage of those in the age groups of 18 to 59 years who received the grant has also increased. As we take stock of that, how much of an influence or perhaps an impact could this grant, I mean, it's now being increased to 370 Rand, will it play a role at all as we head to elections next week? Do you think that it could be a factor that could influence how people vote?
It might be, although quite a lot of the parties have all supported the social relief of distress grant, so there's no real threat from any of the parties to its withdrawal. It would be a real problem if it were withdrawn. So the SRD grant was originally introduced as a temporary grant, but it was quite clear that you can't just introduce such a grant and then pull it away. And there are very, very good reasons to retain it. So it is going to have to be a building block of our social protection system going forward, and that is a really good thing. Electorally, I think it damn well better play a role, because to withdraw it is political suicide for anybody, and it's for very good reason. Society should actually hold the government to account if they withdrew such an important form of social protection.
What we did here, Professor, in addressing COSATU members on Workers' Day this month, President Ramaphosa promised workers that the basic income grant was coming. With these figures now out in the open, I mean, Stats SA's figures are really quite frightening revelations revealed there. Questions now remain on how the grant will be funded and what form it will take.
So the analysis that was done sort of 2021 and 22 to kind of evaluate the impact of the SRD grant on a potentially an entry-level basic income support grant indicated that it had very positive socioeconomic effects, social and economic effects, no negative economic effects. And no negative fiscal effects either. But nevertheless, you would want to introduce it cautiously over time and not necessarily rely on significant tax increases in order to do it. So I would expect going forward that there would be a sort of a positive progressive enhancement of the SRD grant into a much better grant. The target that was set out of that analysis was to ultimately reach the upper bound poverty level as the value of the grant, with a means test that was struck at a level that would effectively make it technically a universal allocation. But there was no need to actually include higher income groups beyond the sort of tax threshold in the allocation. But certainly up to that level, it made a lot of sense. But government would have to get there progressively. It would probably be very difficult fiscally to do something too rapid or overnight. But there is potentially fiscal space to progressively enhance it in real terms annually and grow this grant over a period of time, and that would probably be the most sensible route forward, rather than saying let's find 200 billion rand to add tomorrow.
Very well. Thank you so much for that. Chair in Social Security Systems Administration and Management Studies at the Wits School of Governance, Professor Alex van den Heever, expanding there and giving us some reaction to the more than a third of households in South Africa relying and depending on social grants to put bread on the table.